Get the bleep button ready. Justin Gaethje, you're welcome. You have a belt, son. I'm going to tell you, go get my belt because this ass is going to get whipped. I'm coming for it. So both you and fathead, this is a message for both you knuckleheads. My mat, my time. And with that, welcome to Early Stoppage, a show where the news of the day is usually given just enough time, but sometimes not enough. If this is your first time stopping by, we thank you and get ready for something you won't find anywhere else. I'm John Franklin. I'm joined, as always, by Craig Allen, the godfather of Fight Night Picks. Craig, how are you?
I'm well. You know, I was sitting at home listening to You Can Call Me Al. I'm not a Garfunkel guy. I'm a Paul Simon guy. I'm not really a Paul Simon guy. And I thought, you know what? Let's throw on the shirt. It's Fight Island week. There's lots of fights going on. I'm excited about the card coming up. We'll talk about it a little bit, but there's a lot going on in MMA this week.
I agree. I look like I've been stranded on an island for at least a month. So, or I'm doing the proverbial shaving with sandpaper. So let's get into it, Craig. On this episode, we talk Israel Adesanya and Jon Jones flirtation, Mike Perry's corner, and the price of fat shaming. But we'll begin with another Funk Master flex. The on-again, off-again fight between Petr Yan and Aljamain Sterling appears to be off again, as Sterling has taken to Twitter to once again campaign for the shot, while Yan very cryptically responds with, I heard the UFC has different plans. Craig, I'm not MMA media's strictest follower of current events, which is interesting based on the theme of the show, but that's neither here nor there. I thought this thing was done, Craig. I thought Sterling had this fight. Am I crazy, or what have I missed?
Isn't it the best way to hype up the fight that we have coming up this weekend? I mean, where there's smoke, there's fire, so you have to tune in and watch the main event between Moraes and Sandhagen. I mean, for me, that's the only play. I thought Dana White in the last couple of weeks was kind of like, yeah, you know, that's the fight that we're looking at. Sterling Yan, that's the fight. That's probably a fight that has to happen before the end of 2020. I know we're going to get into it, but you got a lot of your major champions fighting. Is this the Lyoto Machida era, or is it going to be the Petr Yan era at 35? I don't know. I think Aljamain Sterling has a really good shot at beating him, but overall, I thought it was sewn up. I thought it was a done deal. I mean, they're probably not going to make Marlon Moraes fight for the title. They just seem to have a penchant not to. I mean, look at what happened in his fight against Jose Aldo last time out. He beat him, and then Aldo got a title shot. And for Sandhagen, he just lost to Sterling. So to try and make those two fights a little difficult, or to try and make those guys a fight against Yan, it's difficult. Give it to Sterling. Sterling's not cleaned out the division, but he's beaten just about every comer. And I think you have to make that fight.
That's interesting because when I heard this, it smelled like Henry Cejudo to me. And it smelled like maybe back channeling the UFC's reaching out to Cejudo and saying, hey, you know, because I just don't think because listen, Aljamain Sterling has earned this fight 8 times over. And it's like he has to keep reestablishing his fitness for this fight. Listen, the kid's plenty fit. He deserves the fight. He needs to get it. I just think that, you know, they don't view it as a big fight. And I don't know if they're, you know, it's like a couple of B sides of fighting and there's no A side. And I think they're looking for guys that can carry fights, and they don't see that in either one of these guys. So for me, that's where a lot of this is coming from. But I do agree that if you're going to have, you know, get Petr Yan involved in this fight in terms of social media or anything like that, this is the perfect way to do it, to act like his fight's not completely sewn up. Well, obviously it's not. So you're not really acting, but yeah, you kind of keep it out there like, hey, he could fight any of these guys.
So let's go from that and talk about a fight. And I mean, where there's smoke, there's fire. We'll get down to brass tacks, one of the hottest topics in MMA. The war words on Twitter, it just continues to come to a boiling point between Israel Adesanya and Jon Jones. And I mean, Dana White in the last week or so was talking to UFC Arabia on YouTube, and he said, that's the fight to make 100%. It's weird. I mean, I've heard a lot of different people talking about this one, John, so I want to get your opinion. I mean, these guys keep going on and on that they want that fight. Do you want to see a fight between Jon Jones and Israel Adesanya anytime soon? And if so, is it one of those ones that you have to have similar to like an Anderson Silva one-off at light heavyweight in a main event without the belt? Or does there have to be gold flashed out there?
It gets interesting, doesn't it? Because you have a new 205-pound champion. Adesanya certainly hasn't earned a shot at 205 pounds, and Jon Jones isn't the champion anymore. So how do you handle the two of them? Obviously, they're a main event, right? So do you create another BMF title? Do you create a a coolest skinny black guy title? I mean, what do you dangle to make this thing be relevant enough to be a main event and to be 5 rounds? So yeah, the answer to your question is yes, I want to see the fight. It's rare when we get guys of this caliber in their primes, and Jones isn't. I'm going to say this, and it's going to sound like it makes no sense, but it may make sense when I say it. Jones isn't in his prime, but he's not out of his prime either. It makes sense, right? So I don't know. I want to see the fight. Jones is still, the best guy out there to challenge Izzy at what Izzy does best. If anybody can keep away from Israel Adesanya's precision, it's John Jones. If he can introduce different things to it, he's got the length, and it sort of satisfies that. We never got Jones-Anderson fight. It checks a lot of boxes. So, yeah, I want to see it. I don't know. Now, I'll throw this back at you, which is, are we now going down the boulevard of toxicity we've talked about? Because these guys are getting really personal on Twitter. So are they at the point where it's almost like no fun if they fight? Have they gone too far? Or what do you think?
I don't know. I mean, we've kind of been on either side of that weird gray area of, are we getting too personal or not? I think Covington Woodley, way too personal. Cormier Jones, it sold a fight. Habib and Conor McGregor, and listen, if you're a Fight Night Picks fan and you like, Matt and I talking about these undercard fights that it seems like nobody cares about, but you cares about, I'm going to disappoint the hell out of you, because sitting over there on my IKEA couch, one of those little $120 foldouts that when the wife's upset, I can sleep on it in the office every now and again. I have for myself a UFC 229 poster, and it looks like the cat's ass. I have to throw that one out there. I'm actually really excited about that one. But all of that to say, I think you're right. I think you've got John Jones, who's just a little bit out of his prime, but not so far away that it's like, hey, we got to book this guy against like a Court McGee type opponent, right? He's not in the Carlos Condit territory. He's not in the BJ Penn territory, but he's not in the Donald Cerrone territory either. He's kind of like, and not even Anthony Pettis. It's tough to try and define where he's at right now in his career. So for John Jones, heavyweight's a bit of a tease. I think, an Ngannou fight's probably not all that competitive, but a fight against Adesanya is, because there's a lot of storylines that you can pull out. You got the Twitter, the hey Twitter world story that we're talking about right now, but you've also got the fact that, opposing styles, but they can both strike quite well. Who would win? I mean, John, that's the one thing I want to ask you, because with Fight Night Picks, we rarely ever get a fight prediction out of you. What do you see in a fight between Adesanya and Jones at 205? Like, is it a foregone conclusion that John Jones, he's going to, put them tangs on him, as Shannon Sharp would say, and knock him down? Or is Israel Adesanya going to go in there and put on another masterclass like he did with Paulo Costa?
It'd be the toughest fight to pick. I mean, I would probably pick John Jones, but the thing that you just can't quantify is how much Israel Adesanya improves between each fight. And every fight that you think, oh, this is a huge challenge, he does a lot of things well, but the thing he does the most well, and he kind of did this with Romero, and it made for a bad fight because he could never find the finish. He did the same thing with Costa, and it made for a pretty good fight because he found the finish, which is he just has these guys paralyzed, and they just get in there and they don't really know what they're dealing with. Should I play my... He gets so many plates spinning that they can't figure out which one to try and knock down. They get in there trying to play mind games with him, and they've already lost that battle. They get in there and try and stand with him. Should I take him down? They just don't know where to go. And I don't know that he would be able to pull that with John Jones. But at the end of the day, he does have power that I'm not sure John Jones has seen a lot. And this gets interesting for the UFC, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, which is we've talked about it several times. We might touch on it later, which is the UFC's handling of stars. And when they feel like they have, the goose that laid the golden egg, they don't want to ruin that. So now that Adesanya and Jones is a real thing, and Dana seems like he's excited about it, is letting John Jones go to heavyweight put that at risk? Because for all intents and purposes, John Jones is undefeated. So if you risk him going to heavyweight, which may just be out of his it may just be too much for him, then now you risk him losing to someone that he shouldn't lose to before he would potentially lose. Listen, and we're going way too long on this, but let me just say this. The whole point of fight promotion is this. I want to get the guy in the cage against the guy that can make the most money, where if he loses, he loses the least amount of space or positioning in the world, right? That's exactly what they did with Conor McGregor. Conor McGregor fought everybody in the world to build him up. And when he fought Khabib, it was like, okay, he lost to Khabib, but he really didn't lose a lot of standing in the world because of how highly we think of Khabib. I think Jones losing to Ngannou would be worse for the UFC than Jones losing to Adesanya.
And I mean, yeah, I'll leave it with this. I mean, to further your point, I'm looking at the UFC's rankings. Conor McGregor's still ranked 5th. And the news this week was the fact that it was 2 years ago, a couple of days ago, that Conor McGregor ended up losing to Khabib. Like, let that sink in. His last fight at lightweight was a loss 2 years ago, and he's still ranked in the top 5 of the UFC's lightweight division.
Yeah, and it's hard to get that back. And here's what I mean by that. He's fought Donald Cerrone since then and blew him completely out of the water. Nobody cares. Nobody even thinks about that fight. Everybody thinks the last time he fought was Khabib because it was such a big fight. All right, Craig, we've been talking about high-level fighters. Let's continue that. Let's talk about Mike Perry. Craig, what do inner mouth tattoos, Khamzat, and a bidding war all have in common? Well, this week, Mike Perry took to the internet to appeal to MMA fans and, by extension, the world to look for potential corners willing to appeal and ultimately pay to corner in his upcoming fight against Robbie Lawler. Khamzat offered $10K and some, shall we say, entertainers, while there's a GoFundMe that's up to about 4,000 pounds to get Darren Till involved. That's heavy. 4,000 pounds. I think it's a couple tons. Craig, we've tried to stay away from Mike Perry for a while, but it's time to dive back into Florida Man's headlines. What are your thoughts on all of it? Perry auctioning off his corner, Darren Till getting involved, Khamzat getting involved, the fact that, like, Robbie Lawler has to sit through all this. What are your thoughts on this story?
The story makes more sense if Mike Perry was fighting Mickey Gall, but that already happened, and we had the whole Latore Gonzalez situation where that was his lone corner, and he won the fight, but he was fighting Mickey Gall. And I get Robbie Lawler hasn't looked good lately, but this isn't a throwaway fight against Robbie Lawler. Lawler definitely has an opportunity in this because Lawler's going from Neil Magny, who's a ranked opponent that's so game, to Mike Perry. Not that Mike Perry's not game, but there's, as Corey Anderson would say, who's got a big fight coming up against Melvin Manhoff, there's levels. And in this, there's levels. And I mean, Robbie Lawler, it's a step down in competition for sure. And we're turning Lawler into a circus. Mike Perry's already a circus. We tried to edge away from the Mike Perry news because like every week we had something new to talk about. He's getting into an altercation at a bar. He's tossing out some words that he shouldn't be using in public or at home. But it's so weird when you bring Khamzat into it because they've had MMA shows on there before. I mean, the famed Rico Rodriguez competed on a Khamzat promotion fight card. And also, and this is where I got to actually give him some shine, and John Nutt as well with Full Metal Dojo. If you watch Fight Circus that was on Khamzat, that was lit. Like human cockfighting fights, 2-on-1 fights. That was a lot of fun. It was a really good card if you go back and watch that. But in terms of, Mike Perry, the overall appeal, I get it. You're going after a section of MMA fans that bridges over into just casual fight fans. And it goes back to the conversation that you hear time and time again. And I heard Brian Campbell use it this week. You're at a street corner. There's all these different sports going on. You have hockey over here, basketball over here, baseball over here, and you got a fight on the other corner. What one are you going to tune in to watch? You're going to tune in to watch Mike Perry walking out with his girlfriend who he's got tattooed under his lip with models from Khamzat? Or are you going to watch the Houston Astros and Oakland A's in the baseball playoffs? You're probably going to watch the freak show that is Mike Perry. So my thoughts on it, I think it's a little cheesy. It's a little tacky, but whatever pays the bills, I mean, I'm fine with it, I guess.
Like I said kind of in the intro, I'm not crazy about Robbie Lawler being associated with this because he's an old head. He's a former champion. But, Mike Perry is going to do what Mike Perry does. And we've talked about this in the past. The whole Manny being Manny thing, Manny Ramirez back in the day in Boston Red Sox. This is the kind of stuff that Perry does. And people have come out, and we're going to get to this more in depth later about whether or not Perry's a genius for all of this. I think that Perry's like, if he has any level of success or any level of this turning into something, it's the Forrest Gump of it all. He's no genius. He just sort of stumbles into greatness. So even if this becomes something that everyone does, my guess is that the UFC is going to put a rule saying you can't do it about a week before they run a promotion that says if you enter this contest, you can be in someone's corner. So they're good for outlawing things and then marketing to them. So yeah, listen, the Darren Till part of this gets very interesting because if Darren Till can be the one who ends up in Mike Perry's corner, that makes it fun. I don't know that Cam Soda makes it fun. Well, I think Cam Soda makes it fun.
Makes it fun.
The UFC might let Darren Till happen. They will never let Cam Soda happen. So that's where I think it gets interesting. Because ultimately they have to approve all the corners. So Perry's kind of a little bit screwed in that regard. Listen, I like it. I think the guys like Perry keep MMA interesting, but we'll see where it goes from here.
All right. Well, we move on, John. And I mean, T. Ferg's fired up. Kid wants to fight with Nurmagomedov to be booked for the 6th time, but he understands that the lightweight division's a little bit queued up at the top. So, I mean, there's been debate whether or not Ferguson's going to take on Chandler in the co-main event of UFC 254, below Khabib and Gaethje, but terms to that fight were never really agreed upon. Now Tony Ferguson's going, as the kids say, full send and looking for any and all comers. So what's the play here? Because we've talked about this topic before. We talked about Tony Ferguson at the top. Last week, I believe we talked about Michael Chandler and the fact that, is it a slight by the UFC? Toss him in there as the alternate for that fight between Khabib and Gaethje. I mean, should the UFC let Ferguson call his shots? Or do you just go out straight away and book him against Poirier or Chandler? Both fights that fell apart.
Listen, I say this with all due respect to Tony Ferguson. And in Tony Ferguson's defense, he had a very long winning streak, and that is what determined his personality as we know it, right? He's always been a little eccentric, but like this whole thing of like calling out Conor and calling out Khabib and McNuggets and tiramisu and all that stuff, that is all a byproduct of a long winning streak, beating a lot of high-level guys. The last time out, you got beat up pretty badly by Justin Gaethje. So the rules are not the same anymore. You don't get to call shots like you once did, in my opinion. I think that when he had that defeat to Justin Gaethje, the rules changed. And, there's times when you can demand to be, it's like celebrity status, right? If you got the hottest Broadway show, or you're on the #1 show in the world, or you got the #1 movie, The Rock can walk into any restaurant and say, let me get a table right now. He's going to get a table. Somebody that was popular, Zach Morris can't walk into any restaurant and say, let me get a table right now. They're going to say, why don't you have a seat? And we'll get to you when we get to you. I think that once he lost to Gaethje, the rules changed. I think it's smart of him, because it's very Chael Sonnen-esque, it's very Colby Covington-esque, to not acknowledge the fact that you lost that fight in terms of the way that you're marketing yourself. So yeah, if I'm him, I keep pushing forward. But if I'm the UFC, I tell him, listen, man, you're in the queue. You're no longer calling shots.
Justin Gaethje went 72% in his significant strikes in that fight, and for total strikes, he went 143 to 197. I just want to throw that out there. Like, he beat the absolute brakes off of Tony Ferguson, to use a Matt Allen type of phrase. But I mean, in this one, it's tough. Like, what else do you do? Do you book him against Dan Hooker? Do you try and make a fight against like a Paul Felder? Do you give him an up and comer, or do you just try and crunch him into that queue? Because a fight against Poirier, I'm fine with it. It seems like maybe we're going to get Poirier McGregor. I think that's a great fight at 55. Like, again, I'm talking about the fact that I bought a Conor McGregor poster. I'm not a Conor McGregor guy. Just take it on faith that I'm not. But I do like that fight because it's a rematch of the fight at 45. Poirier's getting a lot better. I think that makes sense. A fight against Chandler is interesting because I think a lot of the division's elite beats Michael Chandler. And again, I'm a Chandler guy. I'm a Bellator stan. I think a fight against Tony Ferguson could actually be halfway competitive. I'd like to see that more than anything. I don't know why you don't just try and book that. Like, I'm fine with it. And then the winner, there's your next title challenger.
All right, Craig, let's move on. Craig, you can believe about as much of what Colby Covington says as his hero, Donald Trump. So take this next story and the subsequent quote with a grain of salt. Covington is stating publicly a fight between he and Jorge Masvidal is 50% done. I'll let you guess the 50%. Speaking with Submission Radio, he said the following: Dana White came up to me after my fight immediately and said, "Hey, we want to do you versus Street Judas Masvidal," which I'm sure is what Dana said. I accepted that on that night in that minute. So he knows I'm on board. The UFC knows I'm on board. Now it's just about getting Street Judas Masvidal on board. He's scared. He's scared of my shadow. If my shadow was around him, he'd be running. We get it. He's scared of your shadow. So who knows if he'll show up to the gun. I definitely don't want to have to beat him up on the streets of Miami because I am the king of Miami. Craig, we talked about toxic fights before. This one seems like a foregone conclusion. I actually feel like this fight is a little more timely than Covington Woodley was. I do feel like that kind of missed its moment. What do you feel about this fight? For both
I'm
guys.
wearing the shirt, so I got to say it. Party in the city where the heat is on. Will Smith is the king of Miami. Not these. Jorge Masvidal is the prince if Will Smith is the king and Colby Covington's the jester. Now, would I make this fight? No. I get it. You know, again, smoke, there's fire. It's probably going to sell. It's probably going to get way too personal. Overall, like stylistically, I don't think this holds a candle to some of the other fights that you can make with Masvidal. I think the best fight, I know it's not going to sell. I know people are going to disagree with me. I think the Leon Edwards fight, and listen, I didn't say Leon Roberts. I always mix those two guys up name-wise. Leon Roberts got blackballed by the UFC. If you watch the program a couple weeks ago when they had their little behind-the-scenes show and, you know, you saw Jose Aldo getting his head beat in by Piotr Jan and Dana White getting, we're never going to have that referee back again. There's going to be a lot less Leon Roberts talk, so I'm going to get my Leons in check. But in terms of this fight, if you watch Kamaru Usman fight Jorge Masvidal, albeit on short notice, it's probably going to be a carbon copy of that fight. If not, Colby Covington just taking him down over and over and over again. I don't think it's halfway competitive. I think a fight against Edwards could go either way, but ultimately I think Edwards wins it as well. But yeah, it's a good fight to make. It's going to sell. Do I think it's competitive? No. And would it happen in Miami? Well, I mean, what? The state government in Florida was cool with the Dolphins having 65,000 people at a game. And they said, we're going to stick to 13,000 for now. Maybe they could have fans in the crowd. I don't know. Florida man, right?
It would be interesting. Maybe they could have Mike Perry ref. So I'm with you. I do think it's a little more competitive than you do. Although I do think that we vastly underestimate, you know, Colby Covington has the benefit, and he's earned this benefit by his behavior, which is a good or bad thing depending on how you look at it. But he has the benefit of being underestimated because of how much he talks. Same thing with Connor, same thing with Chael, in their primes. Colby Covington is a hell of a fighter, and I just think that the Masvidal that fought Usman on short notice, give him listen, this is the famous last words, right? Give him a full camp. That's the last thing you say before you lose a ton of money betting somebody. Well, he had a full camp. I think this would be a good fight. I like the promotion. I do not think these guys are good for each other, but I think both of them get understand the game well enough to sort of wink at each other, understand the parameters of this thing, and know that it has to be settled in the cage for them really to make their money. So I'm with it, man. I'm with the fight. I'm ready for it.
And I just want to add, too, before we move on too far, it seems like Gilbert Burns' fight with Kamaru Usman, that kind of got shelved or at least scrapped. So Burns is in an odd way. I know he was going back and forth. There was, you know, a tweet by Ali Abdelaziz. It was getting really weird. So that adds a wrinkle into it, too. Who's Burns going to fight? Does Edwards slot in? Does Masvidal slot in? Who does? Covington, maybe. So that makes it interesting. But we will move on. And, John, in case you missed it, there's no PFL season for 2020, but in 2021, we will have one. And this year so far, we've had the addition of PFL Studios. That's a thing. I mean, they've got a whole series on Rory McDonald, even though he hasn't fought once for them. They got a little Froggy Fresh there. They've signed broadcast deals with companies all over the globe. And even in these weird times, they've got one of their double champs who's kind of threatened litigation against them on Twitter. The promotion just yesterday announced that they've signed some new talent that includes former UFC vets, Cesar Fajea, that had about 18 fights with the promotion, Shimon Moraes, that used to fight for a World Series, and Sungbin Joe, which I found interesting. He was undefeated, double champ or a champ in a couple of different organizations in Asia, came over, had a short notice fight with the UFC against one of the Tamor brothers, lost by decision, and then they cut him. So now he's in the PFL. So, John, it's a pretty open-ended question, but the PFL's in a weird spot. And I've got to ask you, what the hell is the PFL doing right now?
Well, the PFL is doing everything but putting on fights is what they're doing. And I think that, the signing of the new talent was not a surprise because I think that, and again, we've learned here in the United States in politics recently that when something goes down that you don't like, you need to kind of put something out there that you do like, right? So this is a political move by the PFL, in my opinion, to say let's take focus away from this Lance Palmer lawsuit and put it on the guys that we fought. Listen, I say this with full disclosure, being that I used to cover a lot of World Series of Fighting fights. Now the brass of the PFL is a little different than the brass of the World Series of Fighting. Ray Cefo's kind of the one main holdover, but I used to interview Carlos Silva and Cefo and all those guys. But so I have an interest in the PFL doing well because of prior relationships with those guys over there. But it's just not, and I do think that they have a solid plan. Like I thought that their business plan was pretty good. They brought in some good investors. I thought that the season was unique. I thought it looked great on television, and I think that everything they set out to accomplish, they accomplished. Right, the ESPN deal, all of it. The problem is the pandemic hit, and I don't think that they had as solid of a game plan for the pandemic as they should have. Now, I don't know what's going on behind the scenes, but here's my thing. I really feel sometimes that the PFL is underutilizing their relationship with ESPN. And I think that they could reach out to ESPN and get a little bit more insight as to how these things should be happening, right? I mean, listen, we've talked before about the whole feeder league with the UFC thing.
Yeah, I was going to say here.
I'm not going to go down that road again. I'm just going to say this, that, the common denominator between the PFL and the UFC is ESPN. And I think that if I'm in the PFL, I'm making phone calls to my guys over at ESPN and saying, hey, you want content from us. We want to give it to you. What's the safest way to do this? Can you help? Can we create a bubble? Do you have a facility that we can be a part of? And what's the timeline for that? Is there any way that we could slip into the NBA bubble when they're done? Like, how does this? I mean, obviously the NBA has access to resources that the PFL does not, but you got to start figuring this stuff out. And, Dana White has put on a relatively safe environment for his fighters, and the PFL is just sitting on their hands watching this whole thing go down. I think it's time to move, and I think that, you would be having to worry, like they're reacting to these lawsuits when they could be just putting on fights and not having to worry about them.
It's really interesting because when the pandemic hit, a lot of people, it's still awful. It's still terrible. We have cases spiking in Canada right now. It's a bad deal. But at the start of it, it was unknown as to what was going to happen, right? You didn't know what the world was going to look like, 2 weeks down the road, let alone 3, 4, 5, 6 months. So when the PFL said, yeah, we're just going to shut it down for 2020, that's a good idea. They're going to pay, fighters $1,000 a month to, hold them over. Well, that's not a lot of money. I mean, $1,000 a month, $12,000 a year, right? Simple math, easy stuff. You're a teacher, right? Good thing I have a business degree and I just did that. And that's all a business degree is really worth. But all that to say, that's what your lower level talent is getting on a crappy UFC fight night card. And we're complaining about it as media members and fans that, hey, they should get more than 10-10 or 12-12. So for a fighter that was all wide-eyed and bushy-tailed to sign with the PFL, just like a Rory McDonald, or I could go through the list of the fighters that signed with them early on in the year, expecting a 2020 season, it really left them in a bad way. I mean, Lance Palmer, I actually really like, he comes out and he says that because this is like one of their poster boys. He's a World Series holdover. He's won $1 million not once but twice, same as Natan Schultz. And I find it interesting that way. The other thing too, it's great that they're signing deals. It's great that they got Lauren Mack over from One Championship. He does a great job. It seems like they're keeping themselves relevant in the news because one week they have a broadcast deal, then the next week they have one in Russia, and then they have one in South Africa. Like they're really diversifying, and they have something that people can talk about just about every week other than fights. I mean, I'm looking at the headlines right now in the news. They signed Cesar Ferreira. They signed Kamaru Usman's brother, Muhammad, the heavyweight. Then there's the Lance Palmer thing. Then there's a lot of interviews with their CEO, Peter Murray. It's awkward, though, again, like you said, they haven't been putting on fights. This week, you've had, well, even in the past couple of weeks, you've had Bellator from Italy. You've had a couple of shows. Bellator's going to France. There's all sorts of MMA going to France. France is new, right? Because they just legalized MMA in 2020. Then you have one championship holding events. There's a KSW event this weekend. UFC is an event in Fight Island. See where I'm going with this? The longer and longer this goes, PFL is just going to become an afterthought. It's going to be one of those things where they have their first event for 2021 and everybody goes, oh, well, that's cool. And then everybody's going to forget about them. I hope that doesn't happen because I like this. It's so different where they have, you know, the seeding, like your traditional sports in North America, or even like your soccer with the point system. I think that's great. You know, they really want more action, kind of like Dana White's Contender Series. You get more points, whatever. I see John starting to tune out, so I'm going to cut myself short here. All this to say, they're really losing a lot of ground. They have to do something other than signing a guy that went 0-1 in the UFC that not many people know about.
That could be further from the truth. I would never tune out on something you say. Listen, here's where it gets interesting. To me, there has to be a reason why they're not being more diligent at getting fighters in the cage. And the only thing that makes any sense to me is that it's more financially sound for them to not be fighting than be fighting. And the only reason why that makes sense to me is if well, one concern would be because they are a season, they're worried about starting a season they can't finish. The other thing that would make sense to me is that maybe they are a little more reliant on a house money, you know, like people coming and attending than we would think. Like, or than the UFC. UFC might not need the gate necessarily. And because here's why. They have to find venues. The UFC has venues. Right? If all hell broke loose, they could put everybody in the Apex. So my understanding, and I don't know a great deal about this, but I know enough about it to know that, like, you know, the gate kind of pays for the venue a little bit. You know, you have to rent the venue, you get the gate. There's a percentage there. But if there is no venue and there is no gate, it's a wash. So now if you're the PFL, you still have to pay for the venue, and yet there's no gate.
With their events, though, the only thing that I have to say, this is my last thing on it, is the fact that they go to Madison Square Garden, and it's a big deal, right? But they don't go to Madison Square Garden. They're not going where the Rangers and the Knicks play. They're going to the Hulu Theater, the small Hulu Theater. They're going to smaller venues where we're capping attendance at maybe 8,000 is the highest. I'm sure. Google it. I don't have facts on that one. But normally their attendance, like, they have them in maybe not a ballroom, but again, a theater. They're not having them in huge arenas. They're not going to, you know, I don't know, Cowboy Stadium or somewhere and having PFL events, right? So I wonder if it's one of those circumstances where either the venue gives them a set amount of money and the venue gets all the ticket sales, or like you said, they're dependent on ticket sales. I have no idea what a ticket goes for to a PFL event, and I probably wouldn't pay for one because they're never coming to Canada, and I'm not paying for a ticket to go to PFL. But yeah, it's weird. It's a good question. What the hell's going on in the PFL?
I'm sure more will come out soon. All right, Craig, let's move on to sparring sessions. One thing that came out of Israel Adesanya's recent victory is his disdain for people who miss weight. So I want to talk this week about the penalty for missing weight. The commission says 20 to 30%, but Adesanya says should be 90. We've touched on this in the past, but I really want to like zone in on it because last week we talked about weight cutting in terms of its effects on the body. And this week I want to talk a little bit differently about how fighters should be penalized for missing weight. And again, we've had this conversation before, but I want it to be specific to this. Some people think 90% is too much. Adesanya thinks 20% or 30% is too little. Where do you fall?
20 or 30%, I think that's fair. I think 90% is way too much because to somebody reading like a headline, Adesanya says we should take 90% of your purse. Somebody might agree with that. And if you agree with it after my argument, that's fine too. You're entitled to your opinion. But really, the way that I look at it, you got to break it down. If a fighter's getting 10 and 10 to fight and to win, so let's say they win, they get $20,000. Well, their manager gets a cut, then the gym gets a cut, then all the corners, and you got to take into account. There's so many things that fighter has to pay for. At the end of the day, they're only going to get a percentage of that money. A percentage of 10% is a small percent. Like, we're talking single digits. Maybe you're going like 1 or 2%. So yeah, I think, 90 is too harsh, but I am 100% in favor of taking a point or two or whatever it takes at the start of that fight. You bring the poor fighter out to the middle of the cage. The referee says point, 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 and then we fight on. And then there's, you're behind the 8 ball after that point because you're already down 1 point. You got a fight to win. You either have to win 2 rounds or earn a finish in that fight. And I think that's the better way to go about it. But yeah, 90% to me is just too harsh.
I think that's very interesting. I agree with you about the points. I think so. To me, you have to break it down with what is your problem with it and what is the solution to that problem. If your problem, if you're Israel Adesanya, is that it gives you a competitive advantage, well, then taking points away would put you at a competitive disadvantage. So that's where I agree with it. My only problem with it is figuring out how many points to take. Now, I'm with you. Now, I was in the 90% group, and you kind of talked me out of it a little bit. You did. I'll give you that. Here's why I came away from it is that if you take 90% of a fighter's purse, you may cripple him as a fighter financially moving forward. So now he misses weight one time and he can't recover financially to continue fighting. That's an extreme example, but like, a guy that misses weight a lot, like Lineker, right? Who knows how that would have affected him financially if each time he lost 90%. Here's my only pushback to what you're proposing is that, does that then mean that if the advantage is such an advantage that it would help you pick up 2 rounds and I take away 2 points because I really want to put you at a disadvantage, are we going to see a lot more draws? And then what have we accomplished? If I take away 2 points in the first round, you win the second and third. I just think that there's got to be a way to do it. And I'm not quite sure what that way is. But I'm with you. I think it should be more geared towards points than money. Maybe we give a little bit on both ends. Maybe you take 50% of the purse and a point from the fight.
It's a tough one. And it's conversation that has to keep going. And every time that somebody misses weight, it's going to come up. I mean, look at poor Manny Bermudez. He was missing weight at 35. He missed weight at 45. And then it got swept under the rug. But when he fought with New England Fights, and I was there to cover it, he went to fight for the lightweight championship against Bruce Boynton, and he missed at lightweight. So what do you do with a guy like that? Like, that just consistently misses, but he's dependent on the sport financially, like you said. Do you just ruin his livelihood because he's having issues making weight? I know you don't want to give the guy more and more chances, but I do think, yeah, taking a point, you got to start doing that. It can't just be a conversation that comes up over and over and over again. There's got to be some action on it.
All right, Craig, let's move on to Make the Case. We're going to do Make the Case title shots this week. Craig, as I look across the landscape, I realize that other than Khabib Gaethje, most title shots in the UFC are fairly unclear. We really could do this for almost all the divisions, but we'll start with the ones garnering the most attention lately. So again, let's do Make the Case title shots. Let's start 125 pounds. Cody Garbrandt is out. Alex Perez is in. So Craig, I'm going to give you a choice here. Make the case for or against Alex Perez.
Yeah, against. I've been tooting this horn since 2019, and I'm going to stand on the hill, and I'm going to die on the hill. My boy, the assassin baby, Brandon Moreno, deserved that shot more than Alex Perez. And I mean, this guy, since the UFC let him go, he loses, he goes to LFA, he wins, he comes back to the UFC as a draw against Askar Askarov. And even in that fight, he looked amazing. I thought he won the fight. And since then, this guy's gone on a huge run. Those two guys were booked against each other. Alex Perez is a great fighter. I think in his fight against a really tough out, and I wanted to say Davison Figueiredo, but that Jussier Formiga, he put on a great performance. Formiga was on a bit of a downturn. A fight against Moreno made a lot of sense for your next title challenger. I just think Brandon Moreno's the hotter hand. You got to ride with that, and that made more sense to me. A fight between Brandon Moreno and Davison Figueiredo, we're going style for style. A fight with Alex Perez, he's a great fighter. He hits hard, and all three of those guys, Perez, Moreno, and Figueiredo, they all hit really hard. I just needed to see from a selfish standpoint and a biased standpoint, my guy, Brandon Moreno, fighting for the title.
You know, it's interesting. I just talked about it on the last recap show, which you can find either on the dark web or Napster if you're really looking for it. That 125 pounds is getting real interesting because I thought the Cody Garbrandt fight was perfect because Deiveson Figueiredo fighting Cody Garbrandt, bought enough time for these guys to gain a year or so of seasoning. And there's 4 guys, and no one likes to use the cliche of the 4 kings more than me, Darren, Hagler, Hearns, and Sugar Ray Leonard. I'm not saying that's what we have here, but I am saying that Brandon Moreno, Brandon Royval, Casey Kenny, and there's a 4th guy I'm missing here. They've all fought each other.
Not Casey Kenny.
No, but they've all fought each other. That's the relevance.
Yeah.
Casey Kenny fought Brandon Royval. Oh, Kai Kara-France. Those 4 guys are the future of that division, and they're all great fighters, and they're all right there in the sense that if Royval fights Moreno, which looks like he will, you can kind of see that they've all got some history with each other. So I like the Garbrandt fight for that reason. I'm with you. I think if Garbrandt falls out, you put Moreno in there. Although I do like the Moreno-Royval fight. So I'm going to push. Yeah. I'm going to go with you and agree with you that Moreno's done enough to get the shot. But Alex Perez does give us the Royval Moreno fight, which I'm interested in. All right, Craig, let's move on to 170 pounds. Gilbert Burns is out once again. And there is a list of able-bodied contenders for the purposes of this. I want to go with someone who hasn't fought for the belt before. So make the case for or against Leon Edwards.
Oh, boy. Well, he speaks well. He's not rude. He's typically polite. And he means well. And his brother just lost to Costello Van Steenis. So pick one up for the Edwards boys. For me, Leon Edwards has looked amazing. I mean, from his last loss to now, huge win streak. And he's one of those guys similar to what you saw at Germaine de Randamie. This is going to be an odd parallel in her fight with Juliana Pena. You look at that fight, and it's either de Randamie's going to piece her up on the feet or Pena's going to submit her. What happens? Germaine de Randamie submits Juliana Pena, and everybody's scratching their head. Leon Edwards was always thought of as this guy's a technical boxer. He's not finishing a lot of people. He's boring. And that still might be the case, but Leon Edwards has thrown this wrinkle into his game where the guy's a great grappler and a great wrestler. And the perfect example for me was Edwards and, this is weird, but Gunnar Nelson. Nelson, he's got the karate. He's got the jiu-jitsu. At one point, he was a 5-tool player. Hasn't been lately. And Leon Edwards, see, I made the mistake. Leon Edwards looked great against him. He's looked great since. And for me, Leon Edwards poses such a tough test. I think an Usman rematch is a great fight to make, and I'm all for it.
It's interesting because I said in the intro that here's a guy that hadn't fought for the belt before, but he's the only guy that would be rematching Usman of all the guys that could potentially fight him. So that really are legit.
What about Covington though? That's the thing.
What I mean is fighting for the belt for the first time as a rematch. Like he's never had his title shot; those other guys have. So yeah, obviously they would all be rematches. If you fought Masvidal again, if you fought Covington, listen, I think the guy. His resume doesn't knock me completely on my ass. Tumanov, Luque, Barberina. I mean, they're kind of like, a hardcore's dream. Cerrone, Nelson, Dos Anjos, I start to feel a little bit better about it. But I think, listen, this guy's been calling for it for a while. You've taken a lot of fights away from him. He lost the Woodley fight to the pandemic. If he goes in there and really pieces up Woodley, probably gets a title shot. I say, why not? I mean, again, we're dealing with a couple of A minuses, a couple of B sides, not complete A's in that fight. And that's probably why the UFC's looking for a bigger fight. But I say, listen, give the guy a shot. Let's see what he's got. All right, Craig. Up next is 185 pounds. In his post-fight interview, Israel Adesanya sang Jared Cannonier's praises and said that if he does what he needs to do against Robert Whittaker, he should get the next title shot. So, Craig, make the case for or against Jared Cannonier.
I mean, Whittaker didn't look bad against Till. So if Cannonier looks good against Whittaker, then yeah, I mean, I'm fine with him being, your overall #1 contender, no matter whose name's actually at #1. I think Cannonier's the guy. Comes down off of 2 losses to your current light heavyweight champ and the guy that just fought him in Blachowicz and then Reyes. And then he finishes David Branch. Well, what does that mean? Not a whole lot. He finishes Anderson Silva, but
double champ David Branch. Put some respect on his name.
Yeah, where's he fighting now? Russia? Anderson Silva, who was over the hill and hurt his leg, and then Jack Hermanson. Now that fight was a really good fight, and I think that if you can springboard off a finish win over Jack Hermanson and whatever a win you get over Robert Whittaker, I think Cannonier's the guy. I'm all for it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you know, it's the same thing with Leon Edwards. I mean, if you put enough together, you get a close enough resume. I mean, you know, quiet as kept, Adesanya's pretty much cleaned out this division. The real fight you'd want to see is John Jones or honestly Kelvin Gastelum, but Kelvin Gastelum hasn't earned a rematch. So, but that was the best fight, you know. I mean, obviously, Marvin Vittori's outside his door with his boombox in the air like John Cusack, but that ain't happening. So I can go with Cannonier here. I think it's a payoff. It's you know, Chael Sonnen talks sometimes about, and there's our Chael reference about, are you doing what's right for the boys in the back? And really, he's using that in wrestling reference, but kind of applying it to MMA. Sometimes you got to give a guy a fight, a couple of guys fights that deserve it, just so the guys in the back, the fighters, feel a bit better about the chances they can get it. You know, because certain guys know it's a certain point in their career, I either have that it factor or I don't. And if I don't, am I ever going to get this title shot? And this gives them an indication that maybe if you go out there and put on good fights, you might get it. Finally, at 125 pounds for the women, Zhang Weili has no dance partner for her next fight, and no one has clearly emerged. I mean, there's people. The fourth-ranked Tatiana Suarez has battled some injuries, but even if she isn't ready, should she be next? So should Zhang Weili wait for her? Craig, make the case for or against Tatiana Suarez.
Against. I mean, the last win that she has was in June of 2019. Before that, win over Carla Esparza. We're talking September 2018. Alexa Grasso. We're talking May 2018. Viviane Pereira. November 2017. ABC Amanda Bobby Cooper was 1-1 at the time when Suarez was 3-0. And that was 2016. She hasn't been active enough, and that's the problem for me. You got to be active. You got to be winning fights. And again, like you said, it's due to injuries, this and that. You got Namajunas number 1, Andrade number 2, but she's going to be fighting at 25. Suarez number 3, and Jacek Ansarov, she's going to be out for a while, number 5. Esparza. It's tough to make the case for anybody at this point. I think Namajunas? Namajunas.
Yeah, I go with that. I'm with you. I mean, I think that when she was really just taking people down and taking people out, we thought that Tatiana Suarez was like an uncrowned champion. So, please,
like, don't take this as me being negative in you know, regard to Tatiana Suarez. I think she's a great fighter. I think with one win, title shot, and I think she has a decent opportunity. It's one of those Clash of Styles fights. It's fun, but yeah, you can't be off for that long, coming off of injuries, and expect her to go in there and absolutely blow the doors off of Zhang Weili. I don't see that happening, and I don't think the shot makes sense.
Yeah, and I think there's sometimes, too, where you got to, as a fighter, understand that, like, are you putting your best foot forward? You know, sometimes you have to take a shot when it's offered, like Jorge Masvidal did. But, you know, are you really putting your best foot forward to get this shot? And you can make an argument she wasn't ready for Zhang Weili when she was fighting all the time. So now with the break, she may be even less ready, and maybe even if it was offered, she should probably wait. All right, Craig, let's move on to For the Gram. Let's talk this week about Dana White has said he is prepared to risk asteroid strike to book Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Tony Ferguson for a 6th time. So I guess my question is, do you think that this fight is just doomed and we should leave it alone? Do you think that Tony lost the right to get booked with Khabib when he lost the fight with Justin Gaethje, or would you be open to this fight getting booked again?
Maybe in like 9 or 10 years in the Bellator's Legend division, but for the time being, no, I don't want to see it now. I mean, after we saw what Justin Gaethje did to Ferguson, I thought for the longest time Ferguson was the guy that could beat Khabib, but I don't think that anymore, and due to that, I don't want to see the fight.
You know, I think that it depends under what circumstances. Like, Tony Ferguson needs a couple more impressive victories. Like, if he ended up getting that Poirier fight and knocked him out, maybe. But for me, it's just like, I don't want this fight to get booked just to say we booked it. You know, just to be like, okay, we tried. You know, there's certain I would compare a fight like that a little bit to like The Irishman, right? I watched The Irishman, I loved it. I wish they would have made the movie 10 years earlier. And I'm sure they probably tried to make the movie 10 years earlier and couldn't get it together. So that's the movie I wanted to see. I still watched this. I still liked it for what it was.
I just watched the second half on the weekend. I paused it halfway through months ago when it came out, and I watched the second half this weekend. Oh boy, yikes. I couldn't get back into it.
Yeah? I liked it because I wasn't going to not like it, but yeah, there was a time in the world when that movie should have came out, and it wasn't when it came out. So same thing with this fight. All right, Craig, let's move on to one Twitter hitter. Craig, it got really spicy this weekend on Twitter. Stephen Thompson, of all people, leading the way. Thompson is involved in a back and forth with Leon Edwards, and then Khamzat Chimaev came off the top rope. I'm going to give you this in pieces and explain to you kind of where it started and where it ended up. So basically, Wonder Boy called out Leon Edwards and said, you know, you've been out for over a year now. If I'm on my way down, then I should be a nice tune-up. He called him out, and Edwards was kind of dismissive, saying that you haven't really earned it. And he said, Thompson said, if I'm on my way down, then I should be a nice tune-up fight to get people to remember your name again. To which Edwards sort of replied that, you know, you didn't write this tweet. I'm sure your management did. To which Thompson replied, it's definitely me. My tweet game is better than I thought. Well, I guess the gym is where you'll be staying. Like you said, nobody wants to fight you except me, but I guess I ain't good enough. To which Edwards came back and probably had the greatest line of all. Steven, I respect you as a fighter, but you're 2-3 in your last 5. In the politest way possible, just fuck off and fight Chimaev. Good luck. To which, of course, Chimaev came in and said, Dana offered you to fight me, Steven. Why have you not? Are you going to fight me, yes or no? So that's a lot to process. So realistically, who needs to check their ego at the door here and accept reality as it is? Should Leon Edwards be fighting Stephen Thompson, or should Stephen Thompson be fighting Khamzat Chimaev?
Well, it's funny because I already made the case for Leon Edwards to get a title shot. But I will say it's got to be Leon Edwards. You've been out for a long time. I said this about Suarez, so I'm kind of talking out of both sides of my mouth. But Suarez has been out for a while. She doesn't deserve a title shot. Leon Edwards is on such a run. It'd be a rematch with Usman. It makes sense as a fight. But Edwards may need one win to kind of win him over in the eye of the public. So, yeah, for him to fight Thompson, that makes sense. But for either of those guys to fight Chimaev makes no sense. I mean, the risk-reward there. You beat Khamzat Chimaev, you're the flavor of the month for the weekend, and then that's it. You lose to Khamzat Chimaev, you lose any opportunity of getting a title shot. Stephen Thompson, like he said in the tweet, he's not on his way out, but is he? Like, 2-3 in his last 5. So if he loses to Chimaev, no more title shots ever again. You're not anywhere close. For Edwards, then he's got to win 2, 3, 4, 5 in a row because he's already way up at the top, and we're talking about him needing another win. So it's way too much of a risk to fight Chimaev. I think Edwards, realistically, a fight with Thompson, that's probably the most likely scenario. So just book that fight. Just accept the call-out and the fricks that may ensue.
Yeah, and listen, guys, I know that when we talk like this, it's easy to say, well, you can't make the case that Edwards should be entitled to both a title shot and to fight a guy who's 2-3 in his last 5. Here's the deal. Guys like Yoel Romero get title shots, and they should also be fighting other guys. So you can make a case, especially in a world where styles make fights, you can make a case that Edwards is qualified for both. He's been out long enough that he should be going back in there with Stephen Thompson, and he has the skill set. You know, had he not been out, it's the absence does more than just make the heart grow fonder. Absence also makes you question what you have when someone returns. And I think that, yes, when Leon Edwards left, he was this thing. But we don't know what we have in him coming back, so you can't necessarily plug him right into a title shot, although his prior performances would dictate that he's earned one. That's where we're coming from with this. All right, let's move on to posting to the book. Let's talk about Adesanya again, because one thing that we missed last week that I wish we would have talked about was the whole Weidman thing. And the fortunateness of not talking about it this week is that last week is that the thing that's been added to the equation is Anderson Silva. So, Craig, we talked earlier about Israel Adesanya's next fight, and a couple of Hall of Famers have not only weighed in but threw their hats in the ring. Former middleweight champion Chris Weidman has come out and said that he thinks he is a stylistic nightmare for Adesanya, while the man he took the title from, and Anderson Silva, thinks a rematch with Adesanya would, quote, be a dream. Craig, are either of these threats to Adesanya's middleweight dominance credible? And sidebar, why not get crazy and have them do something productive like fight each other for a third time instead of wasting time calling Stylebender's name?
So the last time we saw Anderson Silva out there, Jared Cannonier hurt him. And the last time we saw Chris Weidman out there, he hurt my emotions by beating Omari Akhmedov in a fight where I totally wrote him off. And it was way too close of a fight. So book those guys for a third time. You get the greatest of all time at middleweight. You get Daddy's boy. And I think a trilogy fight makes sense. He's still his son. But ultimately, no. Don't have them fight Israel Adesanya. Marvin Vettori, maybe, but not Chris Weidman. I mean, come on. Like, give Chris Weidman at this point, okay, so he beat a ranked guy in Akhmedov. But if you go down through the middleweight division, I mean, it gets tough. Like, Weidman somehow ranked 9th. I think a rematch with Gastelum at 8, maybe. The winner of Uriah Hall and Anderson Silva, all right. Brad Tavares, maybe. Shabazian, maybe. Heinisch, not Vettori. Vettori beat him. So it's tough. And then with with Anderson Silva, I don't think he's going to beat Uriah Hall. But in a hypothetical world, let's say he beats Uriah Hall. Well, what's the game plan for him? Because a lot of those guys are tough for him. Like, again, it's tough to talk about Anderson Silva in 2020. Because he had that fight against Adesanya that was halfway competitive. And he's had halfway competitive fights, but it's not Anderson Silva fighting in Abu Dhabi against Damian Maia. Like, it's not that Anderson Silva. It's just tough. So just have Weidman Silva 3. It'll sell. It'll be weird, and people will like it.
There's something about guys like Conor McGregor and Israel Adesanya that they're so unique on their feet. And they're smart enough to not take a lot of rematches that it begs the question, how would somebody fight them differently a second time, especially someone as smart as Anderson Silva? So from that perspective, it does get interesting, right? It does get interesting thinking that there's a chance that Anderson Silva could do better the second time. There's also a chance that, Israel Adesanya, which I'm going to throw something crazy at you. Ready for an MMA conspiracy theory? Israel Adesanya's initials are IA.
Oh, don't do this.
You're going to love it. You're already going to love it. You ready? What do you think I'm going to do? Tell me what you think I'm going to do.
I don't care. I don't like where it's going.
You're going to love it. You're going to hate it so much you're going to love it. Israel Adesanya's initials are IA. Reversed, it's AI. And if you think about Israel Adesanya, he's kind of like AI in the sense that he downloads information and then he sort of no? Okay. Anyway, let's get that one on Reddit if we can. All right, Craig. No, I don't think either one of these guys should really realistically get a shot at Adesanya, although I think it'd be interesting. I think you let him fight the third time and then Weidman grabs Stephen Thompson. They both go to Bellator. All right, Craig, let's finish up and start the conversation. Let's tip our caps to MMA Reddit this week. As we mentioned earlier, Mike Perry has offered to allow someone to corner him for free. Ben Askren came out and said that Perry was a genius for this, and if he were still fighting, he would have someone pay to corner him. Well, actually, he posed the question on Twitter, who should corner me if I ever fought again? I don't know if I would take it as far, and I said this earlier, to think that Perry is such a genius that he's reimagining cornering and MMA finances. But the question becomes, out of cage revenue streams, all right? And I'm not talking about driving Lyft. I'm talking about what do you think, and we've had this conversation before, but I want to reopen it because Mike Perry reopened it and he stepped outside of the box. Is this genius? Is this ultimately just going to get squashed by the UFC? What else is out there for fighters?
It's a very timely question, John, and I don't know if you read the article or maybe you eyed it today by our good friend Damon Martin over at MMA Fighting, and the title is see, I can't even read the title, Business Degree, The Business of MMA, The Explosion of OnlyFans and Combat Sports, UFC 1 trailer, and more. And it's an article that kind of sounds like a Patrick Auger show that he has with the Body Lock MMA. You can check that one out. I always thought his name was Auger, but it's Auger.
I saw that, yeah.
Yeah, but the point of the article, Damon Martin goes through a few different revenue streams. So the first one and the majority of the article is about Beck Rawlings with her OnlyFans. And, I know Macy Chasson was kind of critical about it. Fighters shouldn't do this. Ultimately, we were cool with it. Earlier on in the show, Mike Perry with Cam Soda. It's a bit of a gimmick, but ultimately, hey, if it puts money in your pocket, go for it. But Damon goes through it. The story behind UFC 1, it's produced by the same guy that looked after Michael Jordan's The Last Dance. He talks about Puma making a deal with Israel Adesanya and Gary Vaynerchuk signing Stipe Miocic to his talent agency management company, and then going on Ariel Helwani this week and pretty much just saying that MMA is UFC. But ultimately, you got to do what you can while you can cash in. So the question here, I mean, what's next in athlete out-of-cage revenue streams? I actually think one championship, this is a weird thing I'm going to say here, they made a nice play a couple of years ago. Might have been a year ago. I think it was a couple of years ago when they invested $50 million into esports. Have I seen it explode? No. But look at Sean O'Malley. Now, is that a poor example? Yeah, right now it kind of is because of the Marlon Vera fight. But ultimately, Sean O'Malley, what he's been able to do, and he's crossed over into the Twitch world, into the YouTube world. I think more fighters need to go that route. I know there was a lot of shade thrown at Gilbert Burns this week because he'll do interviews with, he could do an interview with Ariel Helwani today. He could do an interview with John Doe, who has 5 subscribers on YouTube. It's one of those things that I've talked about with MMA managers before, where when you're a UFC, or not even a UFC fighter, you're a young amateur. You have to go out. You have to talk to sponsors. It could be Ray's Roofing Company down the road. It could be the guy that shovels driveways. It doesn't matter who it is. Get your face out there. Develop those relationships. Start working your own sponsors. When you're a pro fighter, really start working them. Get a presence online. Have an Instagram. Have a Facebook. Have a Twitter. And really be active on social media. Look at Khamzat Chimaev. He had what? Under 5,000 subs before his first fight in the UFC. Now he's the hottest thing in the world, and he really is capturing that social media presence. So you're talking out of cage revenue streams, the YouTubes, the podcasts, the Twitches. It's not that it's that next. I just think you're going to see more and more fighters kind of try to exploit that revenue model. But apart from that, it's tough to try and predict what's next because your endorsement deals for Adesanya with Puma, it's already been done. I'm going to use a poor example, but Sidney Crosby with CCM or with Reebok, I guess. It was Reebok first. When that kid hit the scene in the NHL and he made that Reebok deal, that was huge. Was I a huge Crosby fan in middle school when it happened? You're friggin' right I was. Cole Harbour, Nova Scotia's own. But all that to be said, that stuff's been done. OnlyFans, that's cool, but you're limiting yourself to a subsection of, the MMA population. So I think Twitch is really going to be the next thing, or you're going to see more and more fighters doing it. Apart from that, it's tough to try and predict what's really next.
It's interesting. Everybody's got a podcast, right? That's what the saying goes, and fighters are no different. I just think that my advice to a fighter would be this. You need to look at the media landscape in the same way people look at the MMA landscape. And we, determine, who we're going to discuss or who we're going to talk to based on, doing some research into where their careers are going and all that. I think this idea that you can just turn on I've used this analogy with you before, and I've said it in other various places, podcasting is like sex. Anybody can do it, but very few people do it well. And I think that that's what they think. Just let me get a couple microphones, turn it on. I'm a pretty interesting guy. I'll be fine. You really won't, because there's things that separate, your thing is fighting. You need to really, the guys that do it well are the guys that are smart enough to reach out to people that either have been shown to do it well, or just the easy way to do it is just get a comedian, right? Because they're quick on their feet, they're entertaining. If all else fails, they can tell a story from the road. So like Bisping did that. A couple other guys have done that. The Fighter and the Kid was built on that. So I think there used to be a podcast a while, and then one of the hosts kind of got in a little bit of trouble.
Oh,
it's either here or there used to be a podcast named Fighter and the Kid. Check it out. So I think
Believe You Me. That's a thing though, right?
Yeah.
That's it.
I think the Fighter and the Kid's still on YouTube. I don't think the government seized it yet. So anyway, my point is that there's a lot of different ways to make money, and the problem with some of these guys is they could all follow the Uriah Faber model, but Uriah Faber kind of, I don't want to say he's taking advantage of fighters, but he's he makes sure that if money's going to be made, he's going to get his portion of it, which makes him good with money. But, he's got his hands in a lot of different things. Uriah Faber would be a good guy to look into because not everybody is, and I think Uriah Faber to an extent is this, but not everybody's Chael Sonnen. Not everybody's going to be able to do all these, things where they get all this kind of, exposure for their podcast.
Perfect example of a fighter that does it really well. And I don't care what you think about him. He does it well in terms of exposure. Look at Brian Kelleher. Look at what that guy's doing. And listen to what he says, because he goes on podcasts. And again, it's kind of like Gilbert Burns. He'll go in the biggest ones. He'll go in the smallest ones. But when you listen to what he says, he goes, listen, I want to set myself up for a career in MMA media. And there's a lot of people that might not want that. But he just continues to work and work and work at it. He sings, he raps, he tells jokes, whatever. He's setting himself up for that. And you can see it materialize before your eyes. He's young in his career. I mean, he's early 30s and he's got a lot of fights, but he's young in terms of exposure at the highest level. He's one of those guys that maybe try and follow in his footsteps a little bit, because I think he's on his way there right now.
Yeah, there's guys. And I mean, if you look hard enough, you can find out who they are. And they'll give you a little bit of an indication of which way the wind's blowing. They may not get involved in everything, but the things they show interest in, certain guys, it might benefit you to look at the things they like on their pages, on their Facebooks, or on their Instagrams, things they that's the way to look. All right, guys, there you have it. This episode of Early Stoppage on the Fight Night Picks is in the books. Be sure and comment under the video. Let us know what you'd like to see next from the show here on YouTube, but also on iTunes and Spotify. Craig can be followed at Craig Allen FFP. I can be followed at SM Quarterman. The fight has been stopped. We'll see you next week. Craig, say something witty.
Let's get into it.